When Erin Caldwell's house went dark during a violent St. Louis storm, she didn't ask her neighbor Terrence Cole to fix the power. Soaked by the rain, with her terrified 9-year-old daughter beside her, she asked only, "Can my daughter stay tonight?" But Terrence noticed something strange. The neighboring homes still had power, and an orange seal was already hanging from Erin's meter. The storm hadn't caused the darkness. Someone had. At 10:38 p.m., rain swept sideways across South St. Louis, hammering the windows of Terrence Cole's narrow brick house hard enough to make the glass tremble. At the kitchen table, Terrence leaned over a cardboard display board while his 10-year-old son, Micah, carefully drew arrows beneath a row of storm clouds. "Warm air goes up here?" Micah asked. "That's right. Then the colder air pushes underneath it." A flash of lightning turned the kitchen white. Micah counted quietly. 1, 2, 3. Thunder rolled over the neighborhood. "Closer," he said. Terrence smiled. "Look at you, already doing the science before the project is finished." The power flickered once. Micah's eyes immediately moved toward the old red camping lantern glowing beside his notebook. Its plastic casing was scratched and faded, but Terrence kept fresh batteries in it every storm season. Micah's mother, Danielle, had bought it years ago. Neither father nor son talked much about why it still came out whenever thunder shook the house. Then someone pounded on the front door. 3 fast knocks, a pause, then 3 more. Terrence stood. "Stay here." He crossed the living room and opened the door against a blast of wet wind. Erin Caldwell stood beneath the porch light, soaked through her jacket, dark hair stuck to her face. Beside her was 9-year-old Sadie, clutching a backpack against her chest with both arms. Lightning flashed again. Sadie flinched. "Erin?" She looked embarrassed to be standing there. "Terrence, can my daughter stay tonight?" He glanced at Sadie, then back at Erin. "Of course. But what happened?" "Our power went out." Terrence looked across the rain toward Erin's house. Her windows were black, but something didn't fit. The house on her left still had a glowing porch light. So did the one on her right. Through the storm, televisions flickered blue behind curtains. Whatever had happened hadn't taken down the block. Terrence stepped farther onto the porch. "When did it go out?" "A little while ago." "You checked the breaker?" Erin hesitated. That hesitation made him look again. Near the side wall of her house, lightning briefly illuminated the meter box. Something bright crossed its cover. Orange. A narrow strip of sealing tape. Terrence's expression changed. He had spent enough nights around damaged electrical equipment to know when something deserved a closer look. "Sadie, come inside," he said. Micah appeared behind him holding the red lantern. "Hey, Sadie, you can use my sleeping bag." Sadie hurried inside. Terrence reached for his rain jacket. "I'll walk over and take a look at the breaker. I won't touch anything I shouldn't." He had barely stepped off the porch when Erin grabbed his wrist. Terrence stopped. Her fingers were cold and trembling. "Please," she said. The fear in her face no longer looked like fear of thunder. "Don't go over there." Rain poured from the roof between them. Terrence slowly looked past her toward the dark house, then back at the orange seal on the meter. If the storm had simply knocked out Erin Caldwell's power, why was she terrified of him, walking across the yard to find out why? He didn't press her. "All right," he said quietly. "I won't go over there." Relief crossed Erin's face so quickly that it only deepened his questions. Inside, Micah had already cleared his science project from one end of the living room. He spread 2 sleeping bags across the rug while Sadie stood near the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the floor. "You want the couch?" Micah asked. Sadie shook her head. "Floor's better anyway," he said. "You can see the lightning from here." Terrence gave his son a look. "Maybe don't advertise that part." For the first time, Sadie smiled. Erin knelt, and unzipped her daughter's backpack. Pajamas, a toothbrush, an inhaler, a stuffed gray rabbit with one bent ear. Terrence noticed how carefully everything had been packed. This hadn't been a decision made at his front door. "Mom," Sadie whispered, "I'll be right next door." Another crack of thunder rattled the windows. Sadie caught Erin's sleeve. Terrence looked away, giving them privacy. At 37, he understood the quiet calculations parents made when there were no good choices. Since Danielle died 4 years earlier, after complications from surgery, every school pickup, grocery bill, sick day, and midnight fever had belonged to him alone. He had gotten good at carrying things, maybe too good. After Erin left, Terrence locked the door and checked the windows. Rainwater raced along the curb outside. Micah carried the old red camping lantern into the living room and set it between the sleeping bags. "Mom's stormlight," he said. Terrence paused. Danielle had bought that lantern during a summer blackout when Micah was 5. Its red plastic was scratched now, one corner held together with clear tape. "If you can see this light," Danielle used to tell Micah, "you know you're home." Terrence had never thrown it away. Sadie stared at the lantern as another low rumble moved across the city. "You can keep it on," Micah told her. "Dad has extra batteries." Terrence smiled from the hallway. Of course Micah knew that. Within 20 minutes, the house settled. The furnace fan hummed. Rain softened against the roof. Micah fell asleep facing the lantern. Sadie remained awake. Terrence was pulling a blanket over the back of the couch when she spoke. "Mr. Cole?" "Yeah." "My mom didn't know where to take me." Terrence sat on the edge of the armchair. "She brought you here. That's what matters." Sadie hugged the gray rabbit tighter. "No, I told her." Terrence frowned slightly. "Told her what?" The girl looked toward Micah, then at the red light glowing between them. "I told her we should come here." "Why?" Sadie answered, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Because Mom said your house is the one that stays safe when everything goes dark." Terrence said nothing. Outside, Erin's house remained completely black, and for the first time that night, Terrence wondered how long she had known the darkness was coming. By 7 the next morning, the storm had moved east, leaving wet sidewalks, broken branches, and gutters overflowing into the street. Erin knocked again, just as Terrence was packing Micah's lunch. She wore navy scrubs beneath a clinic jacket, her hair pulled back, but the shadows beneath her eyes said she had barely slept. Sadie ran to her. "You okay, baby?" Sadie nodded. "Micah let me use the red light." Erin looked toward the camping lantern on the kitchen counter. "Thank you," she told Terrence. "You don't have to thank me." He handed Sadie's backpack over, then lowered his voice. "Erin, have you called the utility company?" Her hands tightened around the strap. "I'm handling it." "What about whoever manages the house?" "I said I'm handling it, Terrence." The sharpness surprised both of them. Erin immediately looked away. "I'm sorry, I have to get Sadie to school, and I'm already late for the clinic." Terrence wanted to ask about the orange seal. Instead, he stepped aside. "All right." She hurried Sadie toward the car. Terrence watched them leave, then looked across the yard. In daylight, the orange strip on Erin's meter was even easier to see. 2 hours later, Terrence was standing beside an intersection box several blocks away, tracing a signal fault caused by water inside a damaged conduit. Traffic hissed over wet pavement while his service truck flashed amber behind him. As he walked back toward the truck, something caught his eye on a small rental house across the street. Orange. The same kind of seal. Terrence slowed. Then he noticed another 1-3 houses down. An older man in a cardinal's cap was sweeping storm debris from his porch. "Power trouble?" Terrence asked casually. The man gave a bitter laugh. "Not from the storm." He pointed toward the meter. "Management says I need some kind of safety repair. Sent me a bill bigger than my Social Security check." Terrence glanced at the seal again. How long ago? Couple days. Before the storm. The words stayed with Terrence through the rest of his shift. That afternoon, when he pulled into his driveway, Erin was sitting alone on his front steps. No scrubs now, no umbrella. Just a wrinkled white envelope held between both hands. Terrence shut his truck door. "You okay?" Erin stood. "I should have shown you this last night." She handed him the envelope. Across the top, in clean corporate lettering, were the words, "North Line Residential Services." Terrence unfolded the notice. His eyes moved down the page until they stopped at a bold line near the bottom. Electrical safety repair. Assessment, $3,800. He looked up. "Erin, what is this?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "The reason I wouldn't let you touch that meter." Terrence read the notice again. Erin had entered a rent-to-own agreement nearly 7 years earlier. If she stayed current and completed the term, she would have the right to purchase the house under the price structure in her original contract. "I've never missed a payment," she said. "Not once." Terrence tapped the $3,800 assessment. "And Northline says you owe this before they'll restore power?" Erin nodded. "They took over management a few months ago. Last week they sent someone to inspect the electrical system. Then this came." Terrence turned to the date at the top of the notice. His eyes narrowed. "Erin." "What?" "This was issued Tuesday." She waited. The storm didn't hit until Thursday night. For a moment, only water dripping from the porch gutter broke the silence. Erin swallowed. "That's what I've been trying to tell them." She explained that Northline had classified the house as an electrical safety risk. Until the repairs were paid for and approved, the service would remain disconnected. Terrence looked toward the dark house. "Why didn't you tell me that last night?" "Because of this." She pulled another page from the envelope and pointed to a paragraph in the contract. Unauthorized alteration of electrical equipment could be considered a violation of the occupancy agreement. "If somebody breaks that seal," Erin said, "they can claim I interfered with a safety order. I could lose my purchase option." Terrence finally understood why she had grabbed his wrist. She wasn't protecting a breaker box. She was protecting 7 years of payments. They crossed the wet yard, stopping several feet from the meter. Terrence didn't touch it. Erin opened her phone and showed him photographs she'd taken before leaving for work the previous evening. Terrence enlarged each image. No blackened panel. No melted insulation visible around the service entrance. No obvious storm damage. That didn't prove the system was safe. He knew better than to pretend it did. He maintained traffic signal equipment, not residential wiring, and a licensed inspector would need to make that determination. But something bothered him. "What repairs did they say it needs?" Erin shook her head. "They didn't." "No itemized report?" "Just the assessment." "Inspector's findings?" "Nothing." Terrence looked at the orange seal again. Across the street, sunlight reflected from puddles left by the storm. Somewhere nearby, a chainsaw started as neighbors cleared a fallen limb. Erin folded her arms against the morning chill. "Sadie asked me if she has to sleep somewhere else again tonight." Terrence looked toward his own house, where Micah's red lantern was still visible through the kitchen window. Then Erin asked the question he'd been expecting since the moment she showed him the notice. "You know electrical systems?" "Some." "You knew something was wrong when you saw that meter?" Terrence didn't answer. Erin stepped closer. "You know how to turn it back on, don't you?" Terrence looked from her to the sealed meter. Technically, there were things he understood, but understanding how to restore power and having the right to do it were two very different things. And whatever Terrence chose next could decide whether Sadie spent another night in the dark or whether Erin eventually lost the house she had spent 7 years trying to make her own. "I could probably figure out what they did," Terrence said. "That doesn't mean I should undo it." Erin stared at him. "So that's it?" "No." "It sounds like it." "Erin, if I break that seal, Northline doesn't have to argue about whether their fee is fair anymore. They'll argue that you violated the agreement. Her jaw tightened. My daughter is sleeping in somebody else's house because I can't come up with $3,800. I know. No, Terrence, you don't. The words landed harder than she intended. For a moment, neither spoke. Terrence thought of the bills stacked beside his refrigerator, the overtime shifts he took whenever Micah was with a sitter, and all the nights after Danielle died when he'd sat alone at the kitchen table, trying to make one paycheck cover 2 lives. He understood more than Erin knew, but he also understood what desperation could make people risk. If I get your lights on tonight and they use it to take this house from you later, did I help you? Erin looked away. Terrence returned to his garage and came back carrying a heavy portable battery pack from his work supplies. I can loan you this. It'll keep phones charged and run a lamp. Bring over anything in your refrigerator you can't lose. Medicine first. Erin's expression softened, though disappointment remained. Terrence spent the next hour helping without touching the electrical system. He carried Sadie's asthma medication and groceries across the yard, made space in his refrigerator, and gave Erin 2 rechargeable work lights. Then he pulled out his phone. What are you doing? Making sure nobody gets to rewrite yesterday. He photographed the orange seal from several angles, the meter number, the Northline notice, the date, the condition of the exterior panel. He asked Erin to hold the envelope beside the meter while his phone recorded the timestamp. Terrence wasn't promising to rescue her. He was preserving what was there. When he enlarged one photograph, his thumb stopped. Printed near the edge of the orange seal was a small identification number. Terrence had seen that number before. He opened a picture he'd taken near the intersection that morning. The meter on the older man's rental house. Same prefix. Then another photograph. Same series. 3 homes. 3 orange seals. Terrence looked across the street, then back toward Erin's dark windows. What? She asked. He showed her the screen. This isn't proof of anything yet. But Terrence zoomed in until the numbers filled the display. But your house isn't the only one. Erin went still. Terrence had refused to break one seal because he believed the safest way to help her was to follow the rules. Now he was beginning to wonder whether someone else had already learned how to use those rules against people who couldn't afford to fight back. The next morning, he showed the photographs to Gavin Price inside the maintenance shop. Gavin stood beside a workbench crowded with signal relays and wet safety gloves. He had supervised Terrence for 5 years and knew he wasn't careless. But the moment Terrence mentioned Northline, Gavin's face tightened. These are private residences. I know. And you're a traffic signal technician, not a housing inspector. I know that too. Then leave it alone. Terrence lowered his voice. 3 houses within a few blocks have nearly identical seals. At least 2 were disconnected before the storm. Gavin glanced toward the office windows. Terrence, we're buried in storm calls. The city is watching every hour on this contract. I can't have one of my technicians turning neighborhood disputes into company business. I'm not asking the company to investigate. Good, because I'm telling you not to. Terrence slid his phone into his pocket. He didn't argue. By lunch, he was back beneath a traffic light replacing a water damage control module while cars sprayed dirty rain along the curb. Then Gavin called. Come back to the shop. Something in his voice was different. When Terrence arrived, Gavin had a printed email waiting. Northline Residential Services had filed a complaint claiming Terrence might have used professional knowledge and employer resources to interfere with privately managed electrical equipment. Terrence read it twice. I never touched the meter. I believe you. I didn't use company equipment. I said I believe you. Then what's the problem? Gavin exhaled. The problem is there's a complaint, and until I document what happened, you're off overtime. Terrence's stomach dropped. Storm overtime paid for Micah's after-school program, the higher winter utility bills, and the little cushion Terrence tried to keep for emergencies. How long? I don't know. Terrence folded the paper carefully. He wanted to get angry. Instead, he said, "Okay." That evening, the kitchen was unusually quiet. Terrence sat beneath the yellow ceiling light with a calculator, 3 bills, and his checking account open on his phone. Micah entered, carrying the red camping lantern. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Are we okay?" Terrence looked up. "Of course." Micah didn't seem convinced. He opened his school backpack and carefully placed the lantern inside. Terrence frowned. "What are you doing?" "Taking it with me tomorrow." "Why?" Micah kept his eyes on the zipper. "In case our lights go out too." Terrence's hand went still on the calculator. Until that moment, he had thought losing overtime was his problem. But Micah had watched Sadie arrive frightened in the rain. He had seen the dark house next door. He had heard enough quiet conversations to understand that adults could lose things even when they tried to do everything right. Terrence reached across the table. "Hey, look at me." Micah did. "Our lights are on." "For now." Those 2 words hurt more than the complaint. Terrence looked at the old red lantern disappearing into his son's backpack and realized that whatever price came with helping Erin, he wasn't the only one paying it anymore. For the rest of that night, he considered stepping away. Micah came first. He always had. But the next morning, as Terrence walked him toward the school entrance, Sadie hurried across the sidewalk with Erin. She stopped beside Micah. "If our electricity isn't back tonight, can I sleep at your house again?" Micah looked at his father before answering. Terrence saw no embarrassment in Sadie's face this time, only uncertainty. "Yeah," Micah said. "You can." That simple exchange made Terrence understand something. The problem was no longer an orange seal or one impossible bill. 2 children were already learning what happened when adults with less power were told they had no choices. So Terrence chose a careful path. No city databases, no restricted records, no company equipment. After work, wearing jeans and an old Cardinals sweatshirt, he began knocking on doors. The older man he'd met earlier introduced himself as Walter Briggs, a retired Army mechanic. His notice demanded $2,900. 2 streets over, single mother Keisha Monroe showed Terrence another North Line notice taped beside her refrigerator. Hers was $4,200. A family on Delore Street had lived in their house 9 years. Their power was still on, but they'd received a warning that an inspection could lead to a safety hold. Terrence photographed nothing without permission. He promised nothing. He simply listened. That night, Erin spread her rent-to-own agreement across Terrence's kitchen table, while Micah and Sadie worked on homework nearby. "Look at this," she said. Terrence leaned closer. Her contract included a purchase option tied to the original agreement. She was approaching the point where exercising that option would become realistic. Walter was close too. So was Keisha. Terrence wrote the dates on a yellow legal pad. Then Erin pulled up recent neighborhood listings on her phone. Homes that had sold cheaply 7 or 8 years earlier were now worth considerably more. Terrence stared at the numbers. The electrical problems aren't what these families have in common. Erin understood before he finished. The contracts. Terrence nodded. They're all getting close to buying. Erin sat back slowly. North Line took over my property 4 months ago. Terrence drew a line beneath the dates. A pattern was forming, but a pattern wasn't proof. North Line could still argue that every inspection had been legitimate, and every disconnection had followed proper procedure. Terrence looked toward the children. Sadie was coloring the edge of Micah's storm diagram while the red lantern sat beside them. He could suspect why these homes were being targeted. He could document who had been affected. But unless he could prove that at least one disconnection had happened outside the proper process, Northline could dismiss everything as angry tenants telling similar stories. And Terrence knew exactly whose story they would try hardest to discredit first. That evening, After Micah and Sadie finished their homework, Terrence found Erin standing at his kitchen sink rinsing 2 coffee mugs. "Can I ask you something?" Erin glanced over. "Sure." "Why did you come here that night?" She gave him a tired smile. "You were next door." "No, you packed Sadie's bag before you knocked. She told me she chose this house." Erin slowly set the mug down. For a few seconds, the only sound was rainwater dripping from the gutter outside. 3 months ago," she said, "Sadie wrecked her bike near the corner of Gravois." Terrence frowned. "She scraped her knee pretty badly. She was scared, and I was still at the clinic." Then he remembered. A little girl sitting beside a bent bicycle. A bloody knee. His service truck parked at the curb while he cleaned the scrape with the first aid kit he carried for work. "That was Sadie?" Erin nodded. "You called me. Then you sat there with her until I arrived." "I would have done that for any kid." "I know." Erin looked toward the living room, where Sadie was laughing quietly at something Micah had drawn. That's why it mattered. She told him that when the power went out, she had considered a motel, a co-worker's apartment, even sleeping in her car until morning. But Sadie had been frightened. Erin asked where she wanted to go. Sadie answered immediately. Micah's dad. Terrence lowered his eyes. Erin's voice softened. She said, "He didn't leave me when I was scared." Terrence had barely remembered that afternoon. Sadie had built a definition of safety around it. Later, Erin took Sadie home to use the battery lights, and Terrence sat with Micah at the kitchen table. Micah reopened his storm project notebook. Dates, cloud sketches, temperature readings, little observations filled the pages. Terrence smiled. "You really kept track of everything." Micah didn't smile back. Instead, he flipped to the page marked Thursday. "Dad." "Yeah?" "I think the storm didn't do it." Terrence leaned closer. Micah pointed to a note written in pencil beside a drawing of dark clouds. 4:47 p.m., lights still on. Then another, 5:12 p.m., truck by Sadie's house. Terrence's expression changed. "What truck?" Micah reached for his phone. "I took a picture because the clouds looked cool." He scrolled through his photos, then stopped. The image showed a wall of gray clouds gathering over the neighborhood, hours before the worst of the storm arrived. But Terrence wasn't looking at the sky. At the far edge of the photograph, parked directly outside Erin's house, was a service truck. And beside the meter stood a worker in a reflective vest. Terrence took Micah's phone and enlarged the image. The truck was partly hidden behind a maple tree, but enough of the door was visible to make out a company logo Terrence didn't recognize. "What time did you take this?" Micah pointed to the screen. 5:12. Terrence checked the weather notes in the notebook. The heavy storm front had arrived much later. The photograph didn't prove what the worker had done, but it proved someone had been at Erin's meter before the storm. The next morning, Terrence showed Erin. Her face changed instantly. "That's their contractor." "You're sure?" "I saw the same logo when they inspected the house." Erin stared at the photograph. "We can use Micah." Terrence looked at her. "No." He saw the truck. "No. We can use the picture. We are not using my son." "Terrence, this could prove—" "It can prove what it proves without putting a 10-year-old in the middle of adults fighting over houses and money." Erin fell silent. Terrence's voice softened. "Micah already thinks our electricity could disappear because I helped you. I'm not putting him in a hearing so somebody can question him until he wonders whether he did something wrong." Erin slowly nodded. "So what do we do?" Terrence looked again at the timestamp. "We verify everything around the picture." Years of troubleshooting signal failures had taught him one rule. One observation could be mistaken. A timeline built from independent records was harder to dismiss. The intersection near Erin's street had public traffic cameras. Service vehicles also generated dispatch records when responding to legitimate utility emergencies. Terrence would not access anything through his job. Instead, he wrote down exactly what they needed: time, location, truck identification, authorized service call. Erin contacted the other families and began gathering their notices and contracts. That afternoon, Walter Briggs gave them the number for a neighborhood legal aid office. By evening, attorney Megan Foster sat across from Terrence and Erin in a small office above a community center, reading the documents beneath fluorescent lights. "This doesn't prove a scheme," Megan said. Terrence nodded. "Not yet. But it gives us enough to request records." 2 days later, the first responses arrived. Public traffic footage confirmed the subcontractor truck entered Erin's block before the storm. Then Megan opened the dispatch report. She read it once, then again. There was no emergency electrical call for Erin's address that afternoon. Erin covered her mouth. Terrence stared at the paper. The photograph now had something beside it, an absence where an official reason should have been. His phone vibrated. "Gavin." Terrence answered. His supervisor didn't say hello. "You need to come to the shop." Terrence stood. "What happened?" There was a pause. "There's something in that complaint against you they didn't expect me to check." Terrence reached the maintenance shop 20 minutes later. Most of the building was dark except for Gavin's office and the yellow security lights over the service bays. Gavin sat behind his desk with the North Line complaint open beside several printed records. "Close the door." Terrence did. Gavin tapped one paragraph. "The complaint says you identified their safety hold as inconsistent with normal municipal isolation procedure." Terrence frowned. "I never said that to North Line." "I know." Gavin turned another page around. "The wording bothered me. Isolation sequence? Field verification. Even the equipment classifications they used." Terrence read silently. Those weren't phrases most property managers would use. Gavin leaned back. "So, I checked who filed it." The complaint had been routed through Northline, but the technical statement came from the same subcontractor whose truck appeared in Micah's photograph, a company that had previously performed maintenance work connected to city infrastructure. "They knew our terminology," Gavin said, "and they knew enough about your job to make it sound like you crossed a line." Terrence felt anger rise, but he kept his voice level. "So, they complained about me because I noticed the seals. I can't prove why they did it." Gavin paused. "But I can prove what you didn't do." He slid a signed statement across the desk. It confirmed Terrence had not accessed restricted systems, removed equipment, used company tools on private property, or performed unauthorized electrical work. "And your overtime suspension ends tonight," Gavin said. Terrence looked at him. "You could have done this earlier." Gavin didn't defend himself. "I should have checked before I reacted." The apology was quiet, but what followed mattered more. Gavin had already forwarded his findings to the independent review requested by the City Housing Office. Within days, the investigation widened. Inspectors reviewed other Northline properties. Tenant notices were compared with contractor records. Several safety holds lack the documentation normally expected before such serious action. The trail eventually reached Northline's local property director. Investigators found that he had approved aggressive safety holds on selected rent-to-own homes approaching favorable purchase dates, creating pressure for residents to pay large assessments or leave. Regional Operations Manager Beth Kessler had signed off on batches of notices without independently verifying the underlying inspections. When confronted with the records, she did not try to explain them away. She suspended the program, ordered independent inspections, canceled disputed fees pending review, and opened Northline's local portfolio to city oversight. Erin's $3,800 assessment was frozen. Walter's was too. So was Keisha's. Late that afternoon, Terrence stood outside the shop as Gavin handed him his restored overtime schedule. "You were right to document what you saw," Gavin said. Terrence folded the paper. "I wasn't trying to be right." "I know." That evening, a utility crew finally parked outside Erin's house. Sadie and Micah watched from Terrence's porch beside the old red lantern. After days of darkness, Erin's home was close to having power again. But as Terrence watched his son beside that lantern, he understood something the investigation couldn't repair for him. For years, he had taught everyone around him that they could lean on Terrence Cole when life went dark. He had never learned how to lean back. 3 evenings later, Erin's porch light came on. Sadie screamed with joy before the utility worker had even finished packing his tools. Erin stood in the doorway with both hands over her mouth, staring at the warm light above her as though someone had returned a piece of her life. The independent inspection found no emergency condition requiring the shutdown. Her rent-to-own agreement was extended to cover the week's loss during the dispute, and the same review was ordered for every affected North Line home. For once, Terrence allowed himself to believe the worst was over. Then his truck refused to start. He turned the key twice in the cold morning air and heard nothing but a tired click. "Battery?" Micah asked. "Hopefully." Terrence checked his phone. With overtime only recently restored, his checking account had almost no room left for another surprise. Before he could call anyone, Walter from 3 houses down appeared carrying jumper cables. An hour later, Keisha offered to pick Micah up from school while Terrence stayed late at work. That evening, Erin brought over a covered dish. "You don't have to keep doing this," Terrence told her. Erin gave him a look. "Neither did you." At the shop, Gavin offered Terrence a place on the storm response field training team. It wasn't charity or a ceremonial promotion. The city needed technicians who could troubleshoot under pressure and document problems clearly enough that decisions could survive scrutiny. "You've already shown me you can do both," Gavin said. Terrence accepted, but the harder lesson waited at home. One evening, he found Micah at the kitchen table beside the red camping lantern. Around them sat containers of food from neighbors, Walter's repaired battery charger, and a note from Sadie, thanking them for giving her somewhere safe to sleep. Micah looked up. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Why can everybody need you, but you can't need anybody?" Terrence had no answer. A year later, another summer storm rolled across South St. Louis during the neighborhood block dinner. Thunder shook the windows. The power flickered once, then twice. Terrence stepped onto his porch and hung Danielle's old red camping lantern from a hook beside the door. Its familiar glow spread across the wet steps. Across the street, Erin switched on a solar lantern. Walter raised a flashlight. Keisha's porch lit next, then another house, and another. Soon the block shimmered with small points of light while children laughed beneath the covered porches. Sadie stood beside Erin, older now but still smiling toward the house she had chosen on that frightening night. Micah came beside his father. Terrence looked at the red lantern, then at the neighbors surrounding them. That first night, Erin had asked if her daughter could stay, because Sadie believed Terrence would never leave a frightened child alone in the dark. Now Terrence finally understood something just as important. Being the safe house didn't mean carrying every burden alone. Sometimes it meant leaving the porch light on long enough for people to find one another. And for the first time since Danielle was gone, Terrence looked down that glowing street without feeling that accepting help meant owing anyone anything. It simply meant he belonged there. If this story touched you, leave a comment. The storm rolled farther east, leaving South St. Louis washed clean beneath the streetlights. Water ran along the curb in silver ribbons, while neighbors folded tables, gathered paper plates, and called children in from the damp sidewalks. Terrence remained beneath the porch awning for another moment. The old red camping lantern swayed gently beside him. Micah reached up and steadied it. "You gonna bring it inside?" Terrence looked across the street. Sadie was helping Erin carry a basket toward their house, the porch light above them burning steadily. Farther down the block, Walter was collecting extension cords. Keisha waved before closing her gate. "No," Terrence said softly. "I think we'll leave it out tonight." Micah smiled. A year earlier, That lantern had been something Terrence guarded almost desperately. It had belonged to Danielle. It had comforted Micah through storms and reminded Terrence of the family he had promised to hold together after losing her. But now its meaning had changed. It was no longer only a reminder of who was missing. It had become a signal that someone was there. Erin crossed the street carrying 2 empty casserole dishes. Almost forgot these. Terrence took them from her. "You didn't have to feed half the block," she laughed. "You really still don't hear yourself, do you?" He knew exactly what she meant. For years, Terrence had measured strength by how much he could carry without asking anyone to notice. Bills, grief, parenting, overtime, broken appliances, school projects, long nights when the other side of the bed felt too quiet. Helping people had always been easy. Being helped had felt like failure. Micah had finally forced him to see the difference. From inside the house came the soft buzz of the refrigerator, the ticking kitchen clock, and the ordinary hum of electricity. Sounds most people never noticed. Terrence noticed them now. So did Erin. She glanced toward her own illuminated home. Sadie still keeps a flashlight beside her bed. Micah keeps 3. They both laughed. Then Erin grew quiet. She remembers that first night. Terrence looked toward Sadie. "So do I." The neighborhood had changed since then. Northline's independent inspection requirement remained in place, and families facing safety holds now received written review information before any long-term disconnection could proceed. Gavin's storm response team had begun training younger technicians to document what they saw before assumptions became official explanations. Terrence helped teach that part. Not because he had become powerful, because he had paid attention when paying attention mattered. Micah stepped beside him and looked down the glowing block. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "If somebody loses power tonight, can they come here?" Terrence smiled. "Of course." Micah nodded toward the neighboring porches. "They've got a lot of houses to choose from now." Terrence followed his son's gaze. That was the real victory. Not that one house had become safe, that an entire street had learned how to become safe for one another. Terrence reached up, lowered the red lantern slightly, and left it burning beside the door as father and son went inside together. That little red lantern once reminded Terrence of everything he had lost. By the end, leaving it outside showed how much he had gained. The courage to trust that he didn't have to carry every storm alone. Terrence's greatest lesson wasn't simply that helping others matters. It was realizing that real strength also means allowing good people to stand beside you when your own lights begin to flicker. So today, think about the person who's always the one checking on everyone else. Ask them one simple question. How are you doing? Even someone like Terrence, the person everybody depends on, may quietly need someone to show up for him too. Have you ever been the person everyone leaned on, only to realize you needed help yourself? Tell me about it in the comments. And stay with us, because the next story begins with another ordinary moment that carries a question no one expects.